Hello, and welcome back to Holistic Healing with Lori, to our podcast episode today. And we're talking about one of my favorite things to talk about, weirdly, which is parasites and how they can be one of the main root causes of chronic illness. These are things like long hauler syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, all these syndromes with these weird, mysterious symptoms. There are wide varieties of parasites, and they each have different actions that they have on the body. So this is where some of those weird symptoms can come from. Also, we have to take into consideration that all of our bodies are different. So for some of us, we might be vulnerable in particular areas. And so that's why those symptoms show up, even if we have the same parasites that we're dealing with. Now, in developed countries, we are told that parasites are not a problem. This is absolutely not true. And in fact, I would say that if you are having chronic symptoms, whether it's one of the more serious cases like what we work with in my Heal Advanced Recovery program, or if it's just allergies, then you have some type of pathogen, some type of parasite in your body. Now, when I say the word parasites, I'm also talking about fungus, things like candida, things like Lyme, anything that is taking your nutrients and causing problems for you. Really, technically, anything that's taking your nutrients. Now, in my own experience, I resisted the idea that parasites had anything to do with what I was experiencing for decades, even. If you're not familiar with my story, I developed severe ME/CFS when I was in my 20s, to the point where I was bedbound for the majority, I would say, of about 8 to 10 years. And the thing is that I did explore the parasite problem, and I actually was seeing things coming out of me. I was seeing worms coming out of me, but I tried to do a couple of parasite cleanses, and it always made me so much worse because I didn't know how to do them properly. Now, if you want to find out more about how to do this in the proper order, we do that, of course, in the Heal Advanced program, also in the Heal Starter program. And I do have a couple of episodes on proper detoxification steps. You have to make sure that your drainage pathways are open first. And I was not pooping every day at all. I was so constipated at that point. So that was one of the issues. But I ignored it because I had gone to so many doctors, and I had finally found one that was really working with me. And we did address candida, but he never said anything about parasites. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, I've been to all these experts, paid so much money, tried to address a lot of the chemical sensitivities and food sensitivities by doing a bunch of allergy tests and allergy injections, and I just wasn't getting well. And so I neglected to really look at that part of it. I think that is one of the main mistakes that we end up making, right? I know that was a big part of my own journey, was recognizing that parasites were a huge part of this for myself. And then when I started working with my clients and my students to get rid of parasites in the right order, we were all like, this is a huge piece of this. I rarely have any students that come through the Heal program that don't see parasites in their poop. So that's a huge problem. Now, there are all sorts of different types of parasites that we can be dealing with. Some of them are visible, but only about 60% are not visible to the human eye of the parasites that we can possibly have in our bodies. So when you think about that and the sheer volume of what I and my students see coming out of us, you can get an idea of just how impactful these critters are on the body. Now, I don't want to demonize them because they're actually there for a reason. And so they are attracted to toxins because they scoop them up, and especially your larger, what are called helminths, right? These are your worms. And they go in and they actually scoop up, they hoover up heavy metals, toxins, things like that. And so we actually address those first. Once we've opened up drainage pathways, those are the ones that we address first. And the other thing that we want to make sure of is that we're not completely exploding them, because remember what we were just talking about as far as the toxins, because then we're releasing a whole bunch of toxins into the body as well. So we want to do this in a stealthy way, right? And these parasites are stealthy too. They have developed ways to hide. They have developed ways to trick the body, to trick the immune system. And they have just widespread effects on our bodies, not only physically, but also emotionally. Some of them actually eat our serotonin, and they can disrupt our GABA production. They can do all sorts of things, and they can even affect our behavior. If you think about the full moon and how like hospitals and police and stuff, they're always like, yeah, it's so much fuller during a full moon. We have so many more people coming in and people just being crazy and all that stuff, which is super interesting because parasites are way more active during the full moon. When our body is creating less melatonin, then the parasites are able to be more active. They just are naturally more active. It also, the full moon also suppresses the immune system enough so that the parasites can go out and party and stuff. So if you find yourself having more trouble sleeping during a full moon, that's an indication that you have parasite issues. Also, if you have trouble sleeping, period, parasites are more active during the night. So let's talk about some of the symptoms that indicate parasite issues. If you have any sort of GI issues, if you have really any kind of chronic illness, it is a very safe bet that you're dealing with some types of parasites. And it's usually not just one type, it's usually several different types, right? Parasites create inflammation. They create food sensitivities. They create intolerances, food intolerances, and they actually create a lot of histamine. So if you have histamine sensitivities, if you have oxalate sensitivities, then you are pretty much guaranteed that you have parasite issues, right? And I started to mention the terrain theory, right? And we talked about how they're attracted to toxins. And one of the big mistakes that people make when they're trying to treat parasites is that they don't address the terrain of the body. So we have to make sure that we are getting rid of those toxins also in a systematic way, and that we're not putting more toxins into our bodies. And this includes not just the food that you eat, but also the water that you drink, also your environment, what you put on your skin, even the clothes that you wear. We're also talking about, of course, GI issues. Something that I really want to make clear as well is that if you don't have GI issues, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a parasite problem, because they can live anywhere and everywhere in the body. So again, if you're dealing with chronic symptoms, you're going to have parasites, right? So if you're dealing with any kind of lung or breathing issues, one of the most common ones in the US and probably in the world actually is called strongyloides. And they actually lay part of their life cycle is in the lungs. Now, they also live in the liver and in the intestines, depending on where they are in their life cycle. Some of the parasites have to leave the body in order to reproduce, and then they come back into the body. But some, like the strongyloides, just keep reproducing in the body. If you find that your rectum is itchy, that's absolutely a sign of parasites, because what they do is they lay their eggs around that area and they secrete a substance that makes it itchy. They want for those eggs to be either picked up by you scratching them and then putting them elsewhere, or they want to be picked up by your bowel movements. And then they send their eggs out into the world to reproduce. Mood disorders, we mentioned earlier, skin issues, stomach pain or tenderness, GI stuff, teeth grinding. Anytime anybody comes to me and says, yeah, I grind my teeth at night, I'm like, all right, that is a big indication that you're dealing with parasites. And they also interact with, so even your helminths, those interact with Lyme, with mold, mycotoxins, with viruses, because they have, if your body is dealing with those things, it's very common that you'll find Lyme inside of those larger parasites, mold, mycotoxins inside of those larger parasites, and so on, viruses. So that's one of the other reasons that we want to get rid of those first. You might have heard me talk about this before, but I have people who come to me and they're like, I treated for Lyme years ago and I got better, and now it seems to have come back. And so my question is, did you fully treat parasites as well? 9 times out of 10, it's a no. And when we're talking about fully treating, we're not just talking about a full moon cleanse. Even once a month is not going to do it if you have these chronic illnesses and these chronic conditions. It's certainly a step in the right direction. But earlier when we were talking about the terrain of the body, we're basically rebuilding that terrain so that it's an inhospitable environment for parasites, for Lyme, for mycotoxins. And then also a lot of the people who come to me, they say I was super healthy beforehand, and then something came along, whether it's a virus or whether it's a very stressful event or an accident or something like that. I was great before that, and then everything fell apart with my body. The thing is that these parasites, they can live with us for years and years, decades even. So I know that personally for me, I have had this issue ever since I can remember. So I had a parasite element in my body for my whole life, basically. And so when you think about it in those terms, these things have been building and building. The toxins, the disruption of the body, the disruption of the immune system over time. And the way that I describe it is that it's like a house that has termites. And maybe we're not aware, actually, we're definitely not aware that it has termites, right? So they're silent. And then if over time, those termites have compromised the structure of the house, and then we have a big storm that comes along, whether it's a lot of stress or whether it's a virus, something like COVID or whatever it is, when that strong storm comes along and the house is already compromised, the structure of the house, everything falls down. So that's when our bodies seemingly collapse. Now, our bodies are very resilient, but we do have to take the time to not only get rid of those parasites, but also to rework the whole terrain of the body. And this does take time. So I tell people to plan on making this at least a part-time job for at least a year. For some people, it takes longer. For some people, it takes less time. It's a process. It's not an overnight thing. Another thing that can be certainly very frustrating is that the symptoms are the last thing really to shift. So you might start noticing, though, that your mood is improved after a while, and you might start noticing some other shifts, hopefully, but those symptoms are the last things to shift. Taking all the probiotics in the world is not going to do it. As always, with our approach here at Laurie Rivers Holistic, we need to do a holistic approach. So again, it's not just about the parasite cleanses. It's not even just about reworking the terrain of the body, though that's a main focus as well. But we also want to be looking at EMFs and electromagnetic frequencies. And we want to be looking at how else the body is being compromised, because we want to build it up to build it up. And a lot of times the things that we are told are healthy for us are actually making us worse until our body gets back control over the immune system, right? Until it gets past this kind of tipping point of health. So things like, hey, eat the rainbow, and using fermented foods, which is great for some people, but for other people, especially if you have histamine issues, MCAS, it's gonna not be a good idea. So one of the things that we do in the Heal Advanced Recovery Program is we use these components called peptides to help the body regain some balance, especially the immune system, to help it to heal more easily and more quickly. So we set the stage to be able to come in and start taking care of these parasites so that the body has an easier time with it, because it takes a lot of energy. It really does. And what we find, which is really interesting, is that right before people let go of a whole bunch of parasites, or even just one really big one, they generally feel a lot worse. Now, this is where the drainage comes into play, right? The drainage pathways. So we make sure that we up the liver support, the kidney support, the GI support. And we also make sure that we're taking binders, and we use a very specific type of binder that is so much better than your regular activated charcoal or bentonite clay or zeolite, even chlorella. So we use something that binds very specifically and very effectively and pulls those toxins out using the drainage pathways. You're doing parasite work all throughout the program, throughout the Advanced Heal program, and you're doing it alongside the detoxification process and alongside always supporting the drainage and these other things that we do. Yeah, so again, we do it in a way that it is the least disruptive to the body. And what I love is the stories that we get to share in the Heal community about what people have been seeing, and people share pictures. And there's one student currently who has a count going of how many she's seen, and she has seen significant improvement. And yes, it's gross at first, but then you get to the point where you're looking at this and you can see what has been causing you so many problems. Because I don't know about you, but all of my labs came back as totally fine. And most of my students, their labs come back as totally fine as well. And I'll just tell you a story of one of my students. So this was a while ago, but she came in and she came from a family of doctors. As soon as they start the Heal eating plan, they're not taking any anti-parasite anything, just the eating plan. They start to see worms. They start to pass worms and see them. Poor thing, it just freaked her out so much. And of course, she went to her family and she took stool samples to her own doctor and they did tests and stuff like that. And that's another thing, is that parasite testing is just, it doesn't work. It's not accurate at all. So anyway, she came back and her whole family said, nope, this is not real. This is not a thing. And I think it freaked her out to the point where she wasn't willing to do the work, which I understand. It's a foreign concept, especially if you are in a family of the medical community. But we see time and time again that this works along with the other things that we do. Yeah, just a couple of different ones that we see in the course. We see rope worms, we see tapeworms. Some people, and I myself actually have had ones come out that are 2 feet long. And then you have to go, okay, long has that sucker been in there, and how much damage has it been doing, and how much of my nutrients has it been taking, and how many toxins has it been creating. And then we also have flukes, and these can be in the liver, and they oftentimes will block the bile ducts in the liver. We do a lot of liver work because it's your main detox organ, right? So we want to make sure that it's working well and want to make sure that those bile ducts are open. So that's a big part of it too, is to release those liver flukes. I have never personally seen any liver flukes from my recovery journey, but a lot of my students have. And then there are also lung flukes and blood flukes. And then you also have your rope worms. I had one student, actually, this was a one-on-one client, and she sent me a picture and she was like, rice is not in the eating plan, and I haven't eaten anything that looks like this. So what is this? And I was like, oh yeah, great. You just got rid of a whole bunch of strongyloides. Good for you. Yeah. And there are a ton of other types. So again, I want to get across that these things are tricky. They like to hide in what's called biofilm. We have to mix up how we treat them because they get used to one thing, or if it's only within the GI tract, then they go to other parts of the body. So we got to be smart about it. And yeah, and over time, you reduce that load, you recreate the terrain of your body, and the symptoms do start to shift after a while. So I hope that's helpful for you. And yeah, we'll be addressing that more in the HEAL Advanced Recovery Program. And please share this episode with somebody that you think would benefit from it as well. Lots of love. I will see you next time.